Good afternoon, everybody. You are listening to Talk of the Town, a brand new talk show here on WUOG, where we talk with members of the UGA and Athens communities about their life and work. This program will air live every Thursday from 4:30 to 5 for the duration of the semester. In the booth is our producer, Mr. Mason Ventura, one of the best in the business here at WUOG. He's going to keep everything running smoothly for us. I am your host, James Thompson, and I'm glad that you're making this program a part of your day. Chances are, since you're listening to a college radio station based in Athens, Georgia, you're probably a fan of the University of Georgia Bulldogs. If you're not, just remember that it's never too late, and if you'd like to talk to someone about becoming a Bulldog fan, you can give us a call at 706-542-4567. We'd be happy to help you start this new chapter in your life. No matter what team you support, however, if you are a sports fan, you are likely aware that at any given college sporting event, there are many people who work behind the scenes to keep everything working smoothly. Scoreboard operators, spotters, video editors, camera crews, these men and women are tasked with enhancing the spectator experience for the fans. On game day at Sanford Stadium, there are hundreds of these people, all focused on performing their duties as perfectly as possible. You might catch a glimpse of them, some in the press box looking through binoculars, others filming the action at various locations across the stadium. So focused on their respective tasks are these dedicated professionals that you probably won't hear from them until after the game, with one notable exception.
It's Saturday night in Athens. And it's time to tee it up between the hedges.
Sound familiar? If you've been to a home UGA football game in the past 23 seasons, it should. Since 1992, that voice has welcomed fans to Sanford Stadium and helped them keep up with the action on the field. It's the voice of Brook Whitmire. But who is Brook Whitmire? And what does he sound like when his voice isn't coming to us through the acoustical marvel that is the Sanford Stadium public address system? Today, we get to answer those questions. With me in the studio right now is Sanford Stadium public address announcer Dr. Brook Whitmire. Brook, welcome to the program.
James, thank you so much. Thrilled to be here with you.
Absolutely. I'm glad it worked out. I want to start off by thanking you on behalf of Bulldog fans everywhere for the good work that you do every game day.
Well, thank you. It's a fun job, no question about it.
Absolutely. Now, I announced on Talk of the Town's Twitter page that you were going to be our guest and invited our listeners to submit questions for you. We did get a response from one of our most dedicated listeners. You guys can call him Jim Thompson. I'll call him Dad. He wanted to know about your other job. I'm sure a lot of Bulldog fans would like to know what you do with the other 250 work days of the year when you're not announcing Georgia games.
Well, James, I'm privileged to serve as the Chief Human Resources Officer for Oconee County Schools here in Watkinsville, just outside of Athens, and I've been in that position since 2008. After a career of being a high school teacher and assistant principal, I moved over into the HR side of things a few years back and have had the privilege of working here in Oconee since that time.
And I think I saw in the local media recently that Oconee County's ranked like number 1 in the state for schools or something like that.
We are, James, on a variety of levels, and try not to boast too much about our fine students and teachers, but we're very proud of our district. And I think what you're referring to is the recent release of what they call the College and Career Ready Performance Index, or CCRPI, and Oconee County Schools indeed is the number 1 school system in the state by that measuring stick, and in my admittedly biased view, many others.
Well, congratulations on that for sure.
Thank you.
Now, I've got to ask, when, let's say, you go to like a board meeting or some meeting related to that job,
Yes.
do you kind of just sit there and just kind of do you want to just bust out with it's Tuesday night in Watkinsville? And
No, but we've got a lot of loyal dogs involved in our organization, including our board members, and every now and again something like that comes up. But for the most part, I'm able to contain myself.
Okay, glad to hear that. So let's talk a little bit about your beginnings as a member of the UGA family. You did your undergrad here, for starters, correct?
I did.
And I believe that was in broadcast journalism with a minor in business.
That's right.
And what did you see yourself doing career-wise when you walked under the arch for the first time?
You know, James, I don't know that I really had that much of an idea at that time. I was drawn toward broadcast journalism. I always enjoyed journalism, enjoyed the news. Of course, as you well know, we've got a fantastic journalism school here, the Grady College. I'm very proud to be a Grady grad. And as I went through those undergraduate years, as much as I enjoyed the major, I kind of felt in my heart that from a family standpoint, that for me anyway, that it was probably not something I wanted to do full time. So being able to be the public address announcer sort of fills that niche. And then very shortly after I graduated, I felt drawn toward teaching, which turned out to be just a wonderful thing, something I love to this day and have had a lot of joy and satisfaction in since that time.
And once you made that transition, you came back to UGA to earn a master's and doctorate in educational leadership, which makes you what we call a triple dog, I suppose.
Yes, sir.
And that makes you one of the few people in the continental U.S. who are actually qualified to administer the fabled triple dog dare. Just want to make a footnote there.
Thank you. I'll make a note of that as well.
Yes. So now the job that everybody oohs and ahs about, of course, is being the PA announcer for the Georgia Bulldogs. Tell us how you found yourself in that role.
Well,
and I realize that's probably a very long, complex story, but
It is, and I will tell you that it's hard to even get into that without telling you that I had the privilege of growing up in a very strong Georgia household. My dad, Dan Whitmire, was a 1950 graduate of the University of Georgia, and for a number of years back when the rules were different, he was heavily involved in recruiting for Georgia. It wasn't his occupation, but he used to travel with the team and did a lot of things in recruiting really right on up into the early 1980s. And so for me, thankfully, going to Georgia games began way back in 1976, something that was, and I'm thankful to say still is, very much a family tradition. So I began my Sanford Stadium experience in 1976, and actually, I don't know if this makes me crazy or what, but I didn't miss a game until 1981 and missed one game that year and haven't missed one since. So started announcing, as you pointed out earlier, in 1992, but for me, my love affair with Georgia and Georgia football goes back a lot farther, and I owe all of that to my dad. I came over here as a freshman in the fall of 1986 and had the privilege of serving as a student trainer on the football team for 3 seasons, actually Coach Dooley's last 3 seasons, which was just a marvelous experience.
oh, wow, yeah.
Unbelievable experience. In fact, anyone would tell you this that was associated with anything that Coach Dooley had a hand in. The lessons I learned from him in ways that I couldn't understand at the time, just getting to observe him as a leader and to see how he did things, there really aren't that many weeks that go by where I don't draw on that in some way, professionally or personally. So that was a terrific experience. But I had the opportunity, gratefully, in 1989 to go to work as a student assistant in what we then called the Sports Information Department, where Claude Felton, who continues to lead that department to this day, was gracious enough to let me come work for him and get some experience in the field of sports information, working with the media and so forth. And so back then, James, every now and again, we actually had a JV football team, and every now and again they would need someone to fill in doing the PA announcing either for that or for G-Day. And so I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity. At that time, a terrific man by the name of Larry England, who was my predecessor as the PA announcer, was doing that as you know, for the main games, and I filled in for G-Day and those other things, as I mentioned. And about a year or so after I graduated, got a call one day from Claude, and he asked if Larry had moved on, and he asked if I would be interested in giving it a shot. So thankfully, in the fall of 1992, that happened.
Brook Whitmire, Sanford Stadium public address announcer, is my guest. So you got that start in 1992. Did you think you'd still be doing it more than 20 years later?
You know, that's a great question, James. And at that time, I was just so happy and honored to do it. I don't know that I ever thought about it, but time has really flown by, and 1 year led to the next, and all of a sudden you look up, and as you rightly point out, it's been over 20 years now.
And when Mr. Felton asked you, if you wanted to be the public address announcer, I mean, did he even get to the end of his sentence before you were like, yes? I mean, I
doubt it. I'm sure that was a quick answer.
Right.
And I think at that time, after I think Larry England had done it for something like 16 years, and they weren't sure what direction they wanted to go in. And I'm sure there were plenty of other people they could have asked. And so I think initially it was one of those things where, hey, we'll give it a try on an interim basis and see how it goes. And so I didn't know if that meant 1 game or 5 games or what. So, but thankfully that's the way it worked out.
Now, I'm sure some older Bulldog fans know the answer to this question already, but your opening line when you come over the loudspeakers for the first time at any given game is always, it's Saturday in Athens and it's time to tee it up between the hedges, like we just heard.
Right.
Has that been the opening line since before you had the job, or is that something that started with your tenure?
It actually started somewhat after my tenure, James, and I think it was, I don't know if there's any way to figure out exactly when it happened, but I know a few games into, I believe it was that first season, might have been the second, but I just felt like we needed to have some sort of statement that described what we're all here for, just to kind of send the message that it's time to get it going, it's time to tee it up between the hedges. And so at some point that came to me, and I just started doing that, and I know it was at least 1993 because I had the opportunity that year to announce the Georgia-Florida game. It used to be back in the old days at the Gator Bowl. For a while there, they alternated. One year the Georgia guy would do it, the next year the Florida guy. They've stopped doing it that way years ago, but I did have one chance to do that, and I can remember saying it's time to tee it up in Jacksonville, which sounded a little weird, but what else are you going to do? So it goes back about that far, and just something that that I've stuck with through the years.
And it's become, an iconic line associated with Georgia football.
Oh, thank you.
You bet. So everybody hears the smooth, polished final product on game day. But what goes into preparing to announce a game during the week or, before the season? What do you do to get yourself ready?
There are really a couple of different things that are going on game day, as you kind of alluded to earlier, James. One is, of course, the game itself. And for me, I try to be very familiar with our team and with our players and numbers and names and whatnot. Probably would be doing that anyway as a fan. So I always try to have that kind of down pat. But then the week of the game, I'll study the opposing team's roster, go through names, pronunciations, positions, and whatnot. And then typically before a game, the day of the game, I'll meet with someone from the other school just to go over that if necessary. Then the other side of it is, as you know, throughout the game, we've got a lot of other things going on, promotional announcements and advertisements and so forth. So there's a script that comes with that I get prepared for that also takes a good bit of time just to get ready for the non-football things that are going on during the football game, the non-game things.
Right. And I think a lot of Georgia fans or just any football fan, any sports fan, thinks of the public address announcer as somebody who's just got a, sweet gig, get to get into the game, get a great seat and, talk over the loudspeaker. But that's got to be A, there's a lot of preparation that goes into it. And B, it's at least at the beginning, it had to be kind of nerve-wracking because, if you make kind of like a long snapper. I'm a little partial to that position because that's what I did in high school. But if you mess up, everybody knows about it. And it's, it's the kind of you had one job thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is so much fun, and it is a sweet gig and one I'm very thankful for. But as you know, every mic is hot, including the ones that we have in front of us right now. And thankfully, there have only been a couple of times where I was reminded of that when was thinking that it wasn't on, and it was. And so I can remember at an early age, and I was a relatively young man at that time, it is a little bit nerve-wracking, or it was, to think, my goodness, if that word that I just said, and it's kind of funny, James, because there's about a half-second delay or so between the time you say something and then the time it comes out and you hear it.
Right.
And a couple of times, definitely, it's like you want to reach out and grab that word between the time you said it and the time it's going to come out. But after a while, I guess it's like anything else. You get used to it, and it just becomes certainly not something you're not aware of, but it becomes something you get more accustomed to.
Right. And, here on radio, we have a button we can push that theoretically will dump, about 7 seconds. We've got a 7-second delay here. But you don't have that.
No, sir. It really is live, that's for sure.
Yeah. Now, over the past 23 years, I'm sure there are some games that stand out to you that have just been, that were, so much fun to announce, that were, ones you look back on with great, they were just great. Would any particular ones you can tell us that stand out?
You know, as I think of it, James, and that's another great question that any Georgia fan, whether they're doing the announcing or not, would enjoy, and I certainly enjoy thinking back over some great games. Certainly the blackout game of 2007 comes to mind.
Right.
Just a phenomenal experience, phenomenal game against Auburn. In 2000, when we beat Tennessee to break a 9-year losing streak to the Vols, you may recall that was a game where the crowd rushed the field afterwards, tore down the goalpost. That had never happened, at least in modern times at Georgia. That stands out. I'm very pleased to say the last couple of years there have been some terrific games in Sanford Stadium. That LSU game last year, the South Carolina game last year, just terrific. And
yeah, that was,
of course,
the South Carolina one was my first as a college student. And
wow.
What a way to start.
Wow. And the Auburn game this year was no slouch, that's for sure. And we've
No.
had some, though this year certainly wouldn't qualify, we've had some great games and wins against Tech, which if you grew up in my household, you would understand clearly that they are and always will be the enemy in the very most important game of all.
Even when we beat them so many years, that rivalry doesn't lose its importance.
And beating them never gets old.
There you go. Now, in your role, I imagine you've had the opportunity to, we've already talked about Coach Dooley, even though that was from a separate experience, but kind of mingle with other Georgia sports personalities. I imagine you and the late Larry Munson were acquainted.
We were, and I've got some pictures that I really enjoy and treasure that are in my basement of Larry, and one of he and I, and actually a couple of them. And as everybody knows, Larry was one of a kind, and I go back far enough to remember when the very first sight you would see when you walked in the press box was Larry Munson sitting there. I don't care what time the game was. He might be there at 7 in the morning for a noon game, and he's already smoking a cigar. So Larry's definitely one of a kind. I know a dear friend of my dad's who I had thankfully gotten to know through him beforehand, but the greatest and grandest Bulldog of them all, Dan McGill.
Dan McGill.
To be able to interact with him and just see him so many Saturdays and listen to him. Actually, when I was in that role as a student assistant years ago, I sat next to Coach McGill for a couple of years in the press box, and you talk about a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I wish I'd had a tape recorder going. One of a kind.
Yeah, I bet. And what about the current play-by-play man, Scott Howard?
Scott's an old friend and a great guy, and I enjoy listening to Scott when I get the opportunity to with road games. And he is also an Oconee guy like myself.
Oh, really?
In fact, I ran into his wife today she is a fantastic teacher at Oconee County High School and was out there. And so, no, Scott's a great guy and does a fantastic job in that role.
I want to talk about your family a little bit. Now, your kids, you've been the PA guy since they've been alive.
Yes.
Is that kind of I'm sure they're used to it, but does it have kind of the shine and glamour that it would for other kids, or is it just kind of the way it's always been?
I think, James, it's probably the way it's always been. It's funny, we were asking, or they were asked that just the other night. We were at the basketball game and ran into a friend of ours who asked them, what is it like listening to your dad? And my son, James, who's 11, and daughter, Allie, it's all they've ever known. But it's funny to think back to a time where they didn't really realize that was Daddy, and now they're well aware of that. And the friend the other night was asking them if they could tell when I was either upset about something or not happy the way a game was going or a play or something like that, and I believe that they can. But they've turned into very strong Bulldog fans and just an absolute joy in their own right.
Absolutely, that's great. Let's talk about your involvement with the Athens community, because you are very involved. I know we actually attend the same church.
We do.
As you know. So, you're very involved there. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe some other places where you're a part of the Athens community?
Well, and you and I do attend the same church, and it's a Classic City Community Church, just a terrific community here in Athens, and a terrific church, something that's very important to Jennifer and I, my wife, and Allie and James. As a teacher, I guess, James, through the years, one of the joys for me was to keep up with students that graduated and moved on. And one of the things just personally that I felt led to through the years was to have a student Bible study that my wife and I led when I was teaching and we were in another community, and that's sort of transitioned on here in Athens. And so one of the joys of our lives is a student Bible study that we have pretty much weekly, and so we always look forward to that, and Allie and James do as well. Oconee County, as I've bragged on it enough, but I'll do it a little bit more. It's just a terrific community to live in, and had the chance to be a Little League coach there and to do some work with the Chamber of Commerce on some events like the Watkinsville Christmas Parade and the 4th of July Spectacular, which is the single best fireworks show that you'll ever see anywhere. So I want to definitely put in a plug for that. But just living in the community and having a chance to interact with the great people in Athens. And Athens, I will say, James, it never gets old. We absolutely love living here, and I cannot imagine. And again, I'm biased as a triple dog, as you mentioned earlier. What an amazing place to have the culture of downtown Athens, the art, the music scene, of course the athletic programs at Georgia, the timeless campus that we all enjoy, and then the surrounding communities. I mean, Oconee County, we just every day we marvel at the sunrises we get to see, and we're driving by cows, and you're 15 minutes from Athens. So it's just an amazing place to live, and one that we really have come to appreciate in terms of raising a family. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Absolutely. Brook Whitmire, Dr. Brook Whitmire, the public address announcer for Sanford Stadium, is my guest here on Talk of the Town. Now, Brook, let's talk about the upcoming season for the Bulldogs. Obviously still a good ways off, but I kind of want to get your prognosis, should we say. I think that's the right medical term there, but of what we can expect next year.
Wow.
That's pretty broad. But
it is pretty broad, and believe it or not, I've not given it a whole lot of thought just this close after this past season. I'll tell you, though, James, that for me, one of the things that I've loved seeing, as we all have in the last year or so, is when you play defense, and I'm going to sound like Coach Dooley here, when you play good defense.
It's not a bad person to mimic in college football.
When you run the ball well and you can stop the run, you play good defense, and you're sound in the kicking game, and you don't beat yourself, you've got a good chance to compete with anybody. And we're just right on the cusp. Coach Rick has done a marvelous job here, and we've had just a consistent – we're playing and have played and competed at a high level, and we're this close to pushing that door down and going to that next level. I'm just excited about – of course, we've got a good bit of talent coming back.
Right.
And
good bit coming in, too. Good
bit coming in, and just the moxie and the attitude that you see in that program when you step up that defense a little bit. And of course, we've been able to score with the best of them the last couple of years, the last several years actually.
Right.
But it's handing the ball off to number 27 is not a bad proposition either.
Not at all. I'd say that's a pretty good strategy.
Yes, sir.
Yep. So. Still, as I said, I don't know how many months, but it's still several months till you get behind the microphone again. During the off season, do you kind of long for that?
There'll come a time when I do, James. It's always, and we love football season as a family, as so many folks do. It's exhausting. It's a wonderful kind of exhausting, but it's exhausting. And by the time it's over, it's nice to have a little break. But there's nothing more exciting than as fall finally starts to get a little bit closer, we'll get, of course, recruiting signing days coming up. Next thing you know, it'll be G-Day, and then before you know it, it'll be close enough to where you can start looking forward to it. And somewhere about midsummer, I get extremely excited about the coming season. Sure do.
Awesome. I did a little public address announcing back in high school. I played baseball the first 3 years, and then before my senior year, I sat down with my coach and talked about my prospects for the upcoming season, and suffice it to say they weren't too good. So I asked if I could do the public address announcing, which he kindly let me do. And as an amateur public address announcer, kind of something I've always wondered, when you're talking over the loudspeakers, obviously, you're excited, you're, talking louder than you probably are with me here.
Yes.
But are you essentially, are you talking the same way you would if you're just having a conversation with somebody, or do you change your voice somehow? Or or does it just come naturally and you don't even know?
I don't change my voice in any way. I'm sure you can tell the excitement if things are going well for Georgia. And of course, you got to keep that in balance. It's not my job to be a cheerleader or anything like that. But at the same time, the excitement is going to come through, and I think that's perfectly fine. But I don't change anything.
No extra vibrato or whatever you call it.
No, but I'm sure that does come through naturally. I think what I've learned from it, James, and what the challenge of it to me is you've got to be constantly thinking of what you're saying now while you're counting up or adding up yardage and distance and down and distance, and you're watching something else, and the referee's about to say something, or maybe there's about to be a TV timeout, and you've got to get ready for the next PSA or whatever. So you're constantly thinking about the next thing. But I've found, and my family will tell you this, that people ask me all the time, gosh, how do you keep your emotions in check there? It's a lot easier there when that microphone's in front of you than when you're sitting at home watching a game on TV and you don't really have a reason to hold it in.
Right.
If it makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess you're just so focused on getting the job done that, it's you could just get it done.
That's right. And there's a job to do, and you can either celebrate or be sad later. But at that moment, you've got to represent UGA as best you can, and certainly that's something that's important to me.
And it's something you've been doing quite well for 23 seasons. I look forward to at least 23 more, Dr. Whitmire.
Thank you.
All Georgia fans here are very grateful to you for what you do every home game during the season. I've been speaking with Dr. Brook Whitmire, who is the Sanford Stadium public address announcer. Dr. Whitmire, thank you so much for joining us today.
James, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to put a lid on this installment of Talk of the Town, but we'll be back next week, same time, same station. In the interim, you can stay in contact with us by checking out our brand new Twitter page. If you'd like to follow us, we're at @T_WUOG. If you'd like to email us, you may do that at talkofthetownwuog@gmail.com. I'd love to hear some feedback about the show today. That would mean a lot to me. Any suggestions, comments, concerns you may have. Special thanks to my guest, Dr. Brook Whitmire, Sanford Stadium PA announcer, for being here today. Thanks also to our producer, Mason Venturo. He's done a great job keeping everything flowing smoothly in the producer booth. I am James Thompson. We hope you'll meet us right back here next Thursday at 4:30. In the meantime, keep it tuned right here to 90.5 WUOG. Sports is up next.